Okay, so I'm really happy to have you on the podcast. I'm excited to talk to you about snowboarding and your agency and what you're up to. Because
Yeah,
I kind of see what you're doing through your Instagram, but like it's exciting to just talk through like what you've been doing and your life up to this point.
yeah, stoked to dive into it.
So let's just start with how did you find snowboarding and at what point in your life did you say this is something that is really makes is something that I'm passionate about?
Yeah, so I was into all different sports throughout my whole life. Hockey was a main one, obviously, being from Canada, that's kind of the main sport, hockey or soccer, especially for the women. Those are the main sports that people played. And then I got a little bit into skateboarding when I was younger, was absolutely no good at it, but I loved watching the X Games and that whole culture. And then my family was kind of a ski family. I was skiing since I was 2 years old, especially I was born on the West Coast and then moved to the East. And one day we were all on a family ski trip, and I just decided to switch to snowboarding. Like all the cool kids in my school were snowboarding, so I wanted to do it too. So yeah, traded in my rental skis for a snowboard, and then really just never looked back from then.
So in our pre-interview, you were talking about skiing and skateboarding and hockey and soccer and snowboarding. How did you land on snowboarding?
Yeah, so hockey was kind of the sport that, like, even at school, if we had an English poetry project, it would all be about hockey. Like, that was my whole dream. I wanted to be part of the national team in hockey. My family was definitely a hockey family, both my brother and I playing, my dad helping coach a lot of our teams. But then I had a few different negative experiences in hockey, especially I went through a very late growth spurt. So I was very small. So despite being like a top scorer, the coach would play his bigger daughter sometimes. There's a lot of different political things going on. And it was right around that same time when I was having those negative experiences that I discovered snowboarding. So I remember just sitting in class, we were doing this project, and I was having this daydream, and I told the guy who was doing the project with us that I wanted to be a pro snowboarder. And at that time, I was no good. Like, I was not good at snowboarding from the get go. It took me like 2 seasons to learn how to turn. But from that moment forward, I decided I really wanted to snowboard. So I started kind of scaling back my hockey so that I can make way for managing both. And then once I was like in high school, I could just concentrate on, I could play high school sports still because the seasons were very short, 1 or 2 months long, and then spend the whole winter playing hockey. So I pretty much just dropped out of all the sports other than like school sports and just focused on snowboarding.
That's amazing. Was there anyone before you kind of leading the charge and telling you how to put yourself out there, how to apply to these competitions, how to just get better at being a snowboarder en route to getting to be a professional snowboarder?
Yeah, no, nobody. I mean, I would read magazines and see these girls, and I had no idea like how you would even get there. I just had like a sense as I started kind of scouring the internet and seeing, I was like, okay, I need to get sponsorships. Because at that time, slopestyle snowboarding wasn't in the Olympics yet. It wasn't until I was 17 when that got announced into the 2014 Olympics. So basically, my only path to like X Games and those things, I was like, okay, I just need to like figure out where I can find the competitions to go to. From there, I need to film videos and send it to stores, to brands, and try to get sponsorships because that was really kind of how you moved up. Same in the skateboarding world, it kind of all runs on sponsorships, and it's like company teams determine if you're pro or not.
So simultaneously, you were going through this entrepreneurship kick. So you mentioned an entrepreneurship camp that you attended at age 6, which I thought was incredibly early. So you were kind of trying to become an entrepreneur, not only for your business side, but also for your snowboarding side and learning how to represent yourself at the same time. Was that helpful to see that from the other side as well?
Yeah, I think it was incredibly helpful, especially for what I'm doing today. But both my parents took marketing in school. My dad, he is an entrepreneur, so I was used to him being home and like kind of seeing what he was up to. So we had a lot of small family businesses since I was very, very young, and especially in the sports space because that's what I was passionate about and most of my family was passionate about. But yeah, we spent 2 years actually because my dad sold the rights to one of his inventions to a company in the US. So we lived in the US for 2 years, which was kind of like a hiatus from all my real life. Like I was away from friends. I didn't really have like established sports and stuff. Like I think I played soccer and a few different things. So we went to camp for a couple of weeks, which we never used to do. Like we actually never went to sports camp, nothing as kids, even after that, because we have an old family log cabin that we just go kind of camp down there with the whole family for the summer. So this was my only opportunity to go to camp. I think they sent me to like a drama camp for a week. And then they sent me to an entrepreneurship camp, and it was really cool. I think it was at a local college, and we learned how to kind of like make products and market products, and we played different games. And yeah, it was a really cool experience. And then that kind of led into me just naturally hustling my way to sell things to make extra money, whether it was to buy like different food at school or to like buy and sell things. I was really into that, collecting sports cards. I was doing all those things. And then that helped me with figuring out how to contact brands and get sponsorships.
Yeah, so then at 17, you were on the Canadian Junior National Slopestyle team. How did that come to be? I mean, you were working toward this point, but how did that fall into place?
Yeah, so the year before I graduated high school, I really started to want to take snowboarding seriously, and I started doing a few different competitions. So then I approached my parents and told them like, this is really what I want to do. Like as much as I've told you this before, it's really like what I think my path will be after high school. So we ended up sitting down with the guidance counselor at my school and figuring out a plan so that I could graduate high school early. Turned out I had some extra credits because I did band for most of the years. I played the drums, and then I was able to take some summer classes while I was working that summer, so that I basically had all the credits to graduate with when I was at the end of my first semester of grade 12 of high school. So I ended up being able to take the second semester off just to go to competitions and then to work. And at one of the competitions, I ended up breaking my tailbone. But then 2 weeks later, I got home and I ended up going to this other competition with a lot of pro riders, a lot older than I was. And it was only about 2 hours away from home. And I ended up pretty much laying down the run of my life and winning. And so this competition got me an invite to another competition in California. I got noticed by sponsors like Billabong. I got a lot of prizing. I got cash. It was like very exciting for me at the time. And then that summer, I decided with the money I had saved up from working in between those competitions that I would go out to Whistler for the summer glacier camp. And that's pretty much where all the best riders in the world would go, as well as like young kids who were paying to basically be around all these pro riders. So I went out there, and then snowboarding got announced that it would be in the 2014 Olympics. And that was, you're around all the vibe of all like the best athletes from all the different countries. So it was really exciting time. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm young, I'm new to this whole scene. So I didn't know if 2014 I would have a chance, being it's only 3 years from then. But I went home and I ended up figuring out that I made the 2011 junior national team. So basically what happened, I didn't even get a message from them. They released a press release, and I got a friend who texted me. And then I figured out that I made it to this team. So that kind of changed my trajectory, because my plan was kind of move out to the mountains and pursue like filming and being a pro snowboarder. But then this changed where it was like, okay, competitions, I need to hire a coach. I need to get a sports psychologist. I need to get a strength and conditioning coach. So it was pretty exciting times for sure.
So let's talk about the process of you not even realizing that this was an option, that you just
Yeah.
got onto this team. No one told you, no one contacted you, you didn't even know the team existed. And then suddenly you were just preparing.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I remember I was like sitting at my cottage, and then I was like, hey, like apparently I made like a junior national team. And it was funny because I had some friends, like for example, half pipe snowboarding had been in a couple Olympics before that. So there was one other girl who we did trampolining training in the off season together, and she was actually from my same area, because where I live is not really close to the mountains. So I was kind of like the only competitive snowboarder. So she was another one, and she was actually a couple years younger than me. And when we were out west, she was training part of like the junior national half pipe team. And so I ended up meeting that coach and riding, but I was no good at half pipe. I had never really been in one. So that wasn't really an option, but it was just cool seeing like that process because I never even knew that snowboarders could have coaches. I had no idea that was a whole thing. Yet all these snowboarders who weren't from where I was from all did have coaches and had been doing some sort of process like that. So I got kind of interacted with that whole scene, and then that got me excited. And then when it was announced that it would be in the Olympics, I thought, okay, they must try to do something similar. And then both her and I got announced to the slopestyle junior national team. So then my family and I had to really kind of work quickly on figuring out, where am I going to live? Who am I going to get as a coach, and figure out all that stuff, because the program still wasn't fully developed where it was like, okay, here's like a national team training camp. Here's your coaches. Here's your training program. It was still like you needed to hire a private coach. You were part of the junior national team, which means you could get into some like junior world championships, some world cups and things like that, but we actually didn't have like a full team program like you would see for USA gymnastics or something like that.
So then you had to finally get some kind of coaching staff around you. So you had to have a physical coach and then a mental coach and then the strength and conditioning coach. Where did you go to seek out those coaching staffs?
Yeah, so a few of the competitions I had been to the year before, we kept noticing, like my family and I, that there was a few athletes, especially from different areas, that had coaches with them. And we would see them at all these competitions and we would like see the coaches and kind of learn about them. There was also, so I'm from Ottawa and Toronto's about 4 or 5 hours away. And there was a coaching program from down around there that actually had a TV show. I think it was on the Disney Channel or something. They were like pretty popular at the time because they had an Olympian from halfpipe, and then they had all these other young kids who were like prodigies. So we kind of investigated that team, but they had an interesting reputation. The coach had a reputation, just, in the show, they play up all this drama, right? So it just didn't really seem like a vibe fit for me. But then there was their main competitor, which was around the same area, which again, it was in our same province where I live, but probably about 6-7 hours away from home. And when I went to meet that coach, my dad and I actually, we had phone calls and we went down to meet them. It just seemed like a little bit of a better fit for me. And they really focus like prioritizing growth as a person and like becoming a good athlete, not just a good snowboarder. So that's what we kind of decided for that. And we figured out that I was able to board, like live and pay for food and rent with my coach's parents. So that was, really like happy for my parents. So I didn't have to like try to be on my own or be in a house full of snowboarders sharing rooms with random people. So I was able to do that. And then when it came to strength and conditioning and the mental side, through hockey, my dad had connections with the local university coaches, and they kind of suggested a strength and conditioning coach who was working with the hockey team, and she happened to be getting her master's in sports psychology. So as we were training, she was also able to give me mental performance questions and homework. We were able to talk about that side while we were doing the strength and conditioning side. But I will say, like, most snowboarders didn't have a strength and conditioning coach. It wasn't a big part. Once the national team progressed, we had strength and conditioning coaches with the team. But for me, it was really important because I wanted to prevent injury. I also come from where there's not the big mountains. So any opportunity I had to like train off snow, since I couldn't afford to be on snow or didn't have access to on snow as much as my competitors or my teammates, was I thought always going to be kind of like a step ahead or something small that I could do to get ahead for me.
So what did you were 17-ish at the time that this was all going down. Are there any things that you took from that experience with the sports psychologist that you still impart in your daily life today?
Visualization was a big one that she did. That was a big part. And also just like self-awareness. So like looking back now, I know she was really just focusing on the basics. I think partially because I was such a young athlete. And like also I was a goof off. Like I would tell her, I would come in to go to the gym and I would tell her, oh, I went to this party with my friend. She's like, aren't you like supposed to be focusing on training and this? And, I was a 17-year-old kid. So she was kind of like trying to put me in line, which I always laugh. Like if I wish I was still in contact with her now, because if she could see that now I like compete in CrossFit, which is like the sport of training in the gym, it would be so funny because back then I just did what she said, but I had no idea what we were really doing or paying too much attention. But yeah, she just tried to like focus me. She even like touched on nutrition and stuff like that, but definitely visualization was a big one. And then, yeah, just the basics of, just asking yourself questions and checking in with yourself, and trying to figure out what you're truly feeling and going through. And are those thoughts really benefiting you or not?
Yeah, so let's also talk about how you concurrently to snowboarding did your college experience.
Yeah, that was both stressful, but also good for teaching myself time management, because it's not really encouraged when you're part of some of the national teams to do college or university at the same time. I know with some sports it's different because, especially in the States, there's student athletes, right? So you guys have like track and field athletes, and then they can still go to Olympic trials and then make the Olympics. Well, here it's pretty much like a very demanding season that's separate from that. So track and field athletes could do that, but snowboarding isn't a sport that's a collegiate sport. And so it really just demands you to be, especially with the season that we have, which is basically like a college semester with like the fall, winter, spring. Yeah, you kind of demands everything. So especially for winter sport athletes here in Canada, it's kind of recommended that you just focus only on your sport. But it was really important to my parents that I did school at the same time. So I always had an interest in business. I knew if I went to school, that was what I wanted to do. I was always like fairly good at school. So yeah, ended up, I started just doing college because I thought that's the only course load I could manage. So we had like a local college that I was able to do a few courses, write my exams like a month early, and then head out for my season. And then I realized it would take me like 10 years to graduate based on just doing a few courses each year and then, just heading out for the whole rest of the year. And I was like, 10 years from now, I don't want to be with kids who are like 10 years younger. And I want to finish this soon. So I ended up transferring into an online university. I saw their ads actually on TV. They were like, they partnered with a bunch of Canadian Olympians promoting their online university and how it was so beneficial for, I think they had NHL players and Olympians and all these athletes who were doing that. I had already experience with online courses because I did it to be able to graduate high school early. And I've always been kind of self-motivated, and I really hate going to class. I hate it. I feel it's too slow. They're just reading off the textbook. I'd rather like try to teach stuff to myself. So that was exactly what my school was. There was no guidance. I had to completely teach myself everything. But that also allowed me a little bit more time management because for some things that I felt I didn't need to study for, I could literally just write the exams, just do the projects, and then maybe put extra time into some of the other things. But it's really hard to manage on top of a schedule of traveling around the world and training. And then in the summer, trying to work to pay for some of that stuff. It was definitely very stressful.
So while you were completing that college degree, you were also on the World Cup circuit.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's a lot.
it was a lot.
How old were you at that point? Like late teens, early 20s?
Yeah, so I mean, I started school the same time that I started the junior national team. The first 2 years I was when I did the college. So I guess 17, 18, 19, I was probably doing that college kind of thing. And then after that, it actually took me, I think it took me to finally finish my degree until 2018, which is not even that long ago. Because I was just chipping away at certain courses. And if I got injured, I would take on another course. And then if I wasn't, I would like take 6 months to finish a course because I was like, oh, I'm really busy at this time, which was the cool thing about it because they gave you a pretty big amount of time to finish a course. So I could kind of like, oh, I'm going to take a month off this course and then get back to it next month. But it was pretty hectic, especially traveling around. I remember one year after nationals sitting working on my laptop and asking the guy whose house we were staying at. I said, hey, like, what time is dinner? He's like, it's 9 p.m. You still have your snowboard pants on. I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, I would just lose track of time. And it was, what was the hardest part, I think, was just seeing my fellow snowboarders just relaxing, hanging out, playing video games, doing whatever they wanted after snowboarding. And like, I still had that responsibility of, doing some coursework and getting on my laptop and chipping away at essays.
So how old were the snowboarders that you were normally traveling with? I mean, were
All
you
ages, like
an outlier on the young side?
no, not really an outlier. I mean, there was some established snowboarders who were much older, but there were also like some that were much younger. And as like I started getting older, we started getting even younger. I think now we see in snowboarding like there's like 14-year-old phenoms. It's crazy. One time I was at Junior World Championships, and it's like Junior World Championships is pretty much U21 or U20, U21. But yet there was like a 12-year-old there. Like, so you have totally different age groups. I didn't even learn how to snowboard until I was like 12 or 13. So yeah, really wide group of age groups. But I would say most of the people I was snowboarding with were around my age, maybe a year or two older.
And had they been through significant sports related injuries? I mean, were you able, as you were getting injured through this process, were you consulting them on like how they've worked through their injuries because snowboarding puts you at such a high risk of repeated injury?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny that you ask because now looking back, I'm like, I wish I did that. I wish I asked them about stuff because yeah, I've had tons of friends in snowboarding who before I even met them had already torn their ACL twice or um, broken ribs, concussions, all these things. But it's funny because we all go through so many injuries in the sport, but yet I feel like we never really talked about it with each other that much. Often because we're so focused on the sport, and then when someone gets injured, they're like gone. So they kind of go home, and then the rest of us have to continue. And then like we see them again and we have no idea what went on in that time. I think now, especially with social media, though, it'd be much easier to keep in touch and see what everyone was doing for recovery and rehab. But because we weren't all based in one place, it was like we'd meet up at competitions or training camps, but then we'd all go back to our different parts of the country or whatever it was. Yeah, it was really hard to keep up with how other people were handling injuries.
Can you give me a comprehensive list of all of the injuries that you've had?
Whew, broken tailbone, separated shoulders, so like the AC joint, broken ribs, concussions, whiplash. Let's see. I got really bad shin splints. I thought were stress fractures once. It was like I couldn't even tie up my boots for like 3 months. Sprained ankles, bad sprained ankles, broken fingers, toes. I exploded my heel fat pad. That wasn't fun. And then lots of bruises and I don't know, scrapes and bruises and cuts and things like that.
Oh my gosh. So after all of those injuries, what brings you back to the sport?
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely weighed on my decision when I ended up, stepping away, for sure, because those injuries just keep weighing on you and weighing on you. It's almost like micro PTSD in a sense because you've had that experience, and now every time you go to a jump, you're thinking about the 10 other times that you've like broken yourself off before. But for me, when I was younger, I was much more fearless than I was now. But also just the feeling of conquering that was really good. Like when you land that run, that feeling of flow and then you're in that flow state and then you land it and like everything is coming together, it's so incredible. And especially with the adrenaline rush, it's like it forces you into the present moment as a sport. So I know, a lot of athletes have to focus on when they're playing basketball, or even when I was playing hockey, I used to sing songs in my head sometimes. Like sometimes I wasn't like there, but with snowboarding, because of the danger, you have to be there. And so it forces you to be there because of that fear, because of the risk factor. So I was really, I think, just addicted to that feeling. And just, I was so in love with snowboarding. I was like, if I die snowboarding, I die. But then as I got older into my career, I was like, that's just, I have so many more things I want to do in my life. And do I want to risk getting another concussion or, tearing my ACL, MCL, never being able to fully use my knee again, or, different things that could really affect the rest of my life.
So how did what happened in 2015 create that, or I guess act as a catalyst for your exit from sport?
Yeah, so 2015 was interesting season. One thing that kind of happened before 2015 is I got into the sport of CrossFit. So for me, it was really cool because it was the first time I had kind of a community. Because like I said, with my fellow snowboarders, they're like your best friends in the season, and then you go off your separate ways and don't see them for part of the year. And so it was very similar too. That when I was home, I would see my family and friends for a few months and then gone. And like it was especially in those years when everyone's developing, just like mentally and personally and professionally, you miss a lot of things when you're gone for so long in those development years. So it was hard to really like build real community and friendships and things. So for me, finding CrossFit was really cool because I felt like I had a community of like-minded people. I was meeting people who were like from totally different backgrounds, totally different jobs. Like they weren't all just athletes. And it was so close to home. I could experience that and train every day, which I thought was really cool. So when I left for the season, I kind of had this homesickness that I had never really felt before. And I was just kind of missing my family, missing the new friends I had made, missing my old friends, and just felt kind of off. And it's funny because when you look back, like that season was really good for me. I learned some new tricks. I had some good results. But that feeling of being off, it just kind of led almost to like a depression where I was every day I would wake up. I was like, I'm living the dream that I always had. I'm in Whistler. I'm doing these training camps, all these things. and yet I'm just not happy. And I was like, and then I felt guilty because I was like, I can't share this with anybody because everyone's on the outside looking in saying, you're living the dream. Oh, your life is so amazing. Oh, we're back here at work and you get to travel the world snowboarding. So that made me feel even worse because couldn't figure out, why am I feeling this if I am living this amazing life that I always dreamed of? So I try to push through, and kind of, open up to a couple close friends, but nobody else really. And then what happened was, it kind of halfway through the season, I went to this competition in the States, and out of the whole Canadian contingency that went, there was like two of us that were left still standing by the finals of the competition. The weather was bad, the jumps were built poorly. We had one girl who needed ankle surgery after practice, another girl who had internal bleeding, and I was trying to prevent her from going into shock. She was spitting up her blood and couldn't remember whose blood it was. Like, she would ask me immediately, like, whose blood is beside me? I'm like, oh, it's yours. And so that was really scary. And then experiencing being in the hospital with, her mom, who ended up having to drive down and talking to her and saying, I don't know, she might have to call it quits, because at that point, like, that's pretty serious stuff. And that was her second serious injury that I've been with her. She had dislocated her hip the season before, and actually my parents ended up being at the hospital with her that time. So just witnessing that and thinking, that is, it's just a matter of time for something like that to happen to me, especially if I'm going to make a run for the next Olympics for 2018, since I had missed out on 2014. I thought, could I put myself through 3 more years of that? Is it still worth it for me? Are there, is it, especially at the age I was, is there still a chance in another sport for me? Or what if I continue on, I don't make the next Olympics, I'm left with a body that just can't do anything else. I have concussions, I have, I'm going deeper into this depression, I'm getting more anxious. I had kind of a history of anxiety attacks. I didn't really know what they were coming from. And so that was a big game changer for me. I spent the whole drive home just thinking about my decisions, about what I wanted to do in life, and just trying to come to terms with my thought that maybe I wanted to leave the sport, because those thoughts were coming up, and they'd come up for a couple of years, but I always was like very quickly to dismiss it, because I was like, I spent my whole life like focusing on the sport. I said to my parents at 3 years old, I wanted to go to the Olympics, and this is my chance. How could I ever give that up? So it took a lot just to accept it personally before I even was then able to like vocalize it to other people. But it was after that that I started realizing, I don't know if I want to continue doing this. But I still went all in till the rest of the season, because I said I can't just like call it quits on a whim, because it's, again, giving up everything I've worked for my whole life. So let me just like spend all the money on going to every event, like doing everything I can this season, giving it my all, and then see how I feel at the end. And by the end, it was kind of even worse from pushing through that. I even broke my ribs that season later on at a World Cup. I hit my head a couple times that I was not too happy about. So at the end of the season, I decided to kind of just say, hey, don't consider me for the national team selection next year. I'm going to take a break, which ended up being a permanent break.
So how many of your teammates and friends have at least 3 or 4 snowboarding related injuries?
Oh, every one of them for sure. Yeah, I mean, with all action sports, you're falling all the time, and falling is kind of how you learn, but the falls are very big, especially when you're hitting like 60, 70 plus foot jumps. And then with throwing in weather conditions and throwing in new features and different things, it just kind of just bound to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a US national team skier on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how from the outside looking in, people would see his sport and think, "Oh my gosh, he's so reckless."
Mm.
To just put his body on the line over and over and over for this thing that is not a lifetime experience. I mean, it's not a lifetime job. So why continue to put your body and your mental state in peril for this thing? And he was like, it doesn't seem reckless to me because I'm in total control, and it's kind of just like signing a waiver when you start at age like 3. I will get injured at some point during this experience, and I just have to come to terms with that. Is that kind of
Yeah.
how your sport works as well?
Yeah, you kind of normalize it from an early age, because like from an early age, like I think one of my first major snowboard injuries, I mean, I had a few different bumps and bruises and things, but I remember I was like probably breaking my wrist. But that was like normal, right? Like you just see movies and everyone is snowboarding with, like you see the pro snowboarders snowboarding with a cast on. So you almost think it's cool actually at that point. You're like, oh, check me out, I got a cast and now I'm still riding. And yeah, so it's almost like a rite of passage, those first few injuries that you get. And then it makes it just kind of normalized to see them more so. And then you have your peers around you experiencing injuries. So it's almost more normalized. But yeah, it just comes with the territory. And that's one of the biggest mindset shifts that I had in my last season was I started looking at it from an outside perspective. And once I started looking at it from the outside perspective, I knew that was kind of where it was over for me because it's very hard to get back. So when I was there, it was like injuries were normalized. Like I said, like I'm doing what I love. So if I hurt myself or if something worse happens, like it happened doing what I love. So that's, a sacrifice I'm willing to make. As I started looking at it from outside perspective and like looking at other sports, I was like, this isn't normal. And the fact that I thought it wasn't normal meant I wasn't mentally in it anymore. And it really hit home when I was watching the Netflix documentary Drive to Survive on F1. I think in season one, they were talking about the crashes and one of the athletes who died, and one of the drivers was saying that there was like a quote, and it was, I probably will butcher it, but he was saying the moment that you have any fear is when you have to retire. When you think like you're worried about crashing, one, it's probably going to be more likely that you then will crash. So it's going to change how you're competing. But two, you will never be competitive anymore. And so that was a big thing that happened to the end of my last season. I was even making excuses. My coaches will say, "Oh, go learn, do this trick, one of my hardest tricks," or "How about learning this trick?" And I just felt like I always had an excuse of why I didn't want to do it, and it was because I was scared. I didn't want to get injured again. I thought trying to push myself to do this trick right now is not worth the injury, and you can't think like that to be competitive and to progress in the sport.
Yeah, I mean, that that mind shift, would you say that that helped break up with your sport?
It's interesting because looking back, I wonder if it didn't happen, would I still be competing? And it's hard to say, like, I know now that I'm grateful that it happened. It was one of the best lessons for me, and I'm happy with what I'm doing now. And it was all off the building blocks of what I experienced then. But you never know how that would have changed. You never know how, if that didn't happen, would I just be super happy the same way I am now, but as a snowboarder? It's always just so hard to say because I still love the sport. I love doing it for fun. I just don't feel the need to have to push myself to that level anymore of trying to do these tricks that I could get really seriously injured on. But yeah, I think it was important, but it was also hard because then looking back, I felt like this resentment to the sport because of all these injuries I went through and all these different things. Then I was like, well, for what? Because now I walked away. But obviously my mindset has shifted now where it was like that was all experience that made me who I was today. It wasn't for nothing. It wasn't like I had to restart my life after that moment.
So how does it feel to get back on the slopes and not be competing for anything?
Yeah, for the first couple seasons, it was hard. It was really hard even to watch any other sports because I was just so used to being the athlete that people cheered for. Like I'm used to being that person. If I went snowboarding, people were like, "Oh, she's on the national team and this and this." And you're just used to having the limelight and the attention. And so it was really hard to kind of get over that and realize like that's not who I am in this sense anymore. I can just go and just be a fan of other sports or just participate for fun and not be at the highest level. That took a long time to get over.
Yeah, I know. I've had a couple athletes who still have access to their sports once they're done competing. I mean, because snowboarding is such an individual sport and you have access to the slopes every winter and potentially all year round if you live in a high elevation. I mean, that's different than ending a football career or ending a soccer career where there's a clear delineation when you're done playing the sport that you can't become the team anymore. And it's different with
Yeah.
individual sports like swimming and like snowboarding and skiing that you do by yourself for yourself and you still have access to. So I can't imagine how that would feel to get back at like a ski resort and know like I used to be really amazing at this and now I'm in the same chairlift with families with young kids who are learning to ski. I mean, was that a daunting task to re-envision your life with the sport still in it, but not in the same capacity?
Yeah, it was really difficult. I was actually, I was almost lucky. My first season, I went like once. I went from like 100 days a season to like once because I ended up getting sick. I got mono the next year after I retired and I couldn't do anything for like 6 months. So,
Yeah, I had
um, yeah, it was horrible, but it was almost good in a sense because then I didn't have to go through that because like I couldn't even go snowboard or do anything. So I had like a little bit of separation. But yeah, it's really hard, and it's hard because snowboarding is a lifestyle. And so I feel like I, because of how seriously I took it, and I mean, some of it because I was so goal oriented was kind of my detriment of to why my mental health kind of went down after I retired and why my identity was so tied with it. Was because I stopped feeling that just like love and lifestyle about it. Because I, even when snowboarding got into the Olympics, there was a lot of snowboarders who were like, snowboarding isn't a sport, like this isn't cool, we don't want it in the Olympics. They were very against it because they like the just the pro snowboarding side. You're just filming, you're going to the backcountry, you're doing things. They didn't like that it was being made into this sport. And I know skateboarders feel kind of the same way, and surfers somewhat with the Olympics now. But eventually people get over it and they think it's cool, and it gives the sport a whole new limelight, which is really good for it. But there was two sides, and I was very much on the side of like, yes, this is a sport, I love the Olympics, like all excited. But I saw recently we have an amazing Paralympic snowboarder who lives around this area. He used to live around this area, he's from here, but now he lives on the West Coast, and he announced his retirement from competing last week. And I saw this other pro snowboarder who commented and said, you're not retired from snowboarding, you're just retired from like jumping through all the hoops of doing competition and all these things. I was like, that's a really interesting comment. I wish somebody had said that to me, because for me, because I looked at it just exactly like that, like a sport, and then it was over. I didn't realize that. I was like, no, like I can still have the love for this and just not do it at the same, I could do different sides of it. I could go to the backcountry. Behind me, I have actually this split board that I bought last year, which means it kind of separates in half. And so you can trek up the backcountry, put it back together, and then go down, which I last year, without any travel with COVID, I wasn't able to actually use it yet. But that's going to allow me to go do backcountry snowboarding and things that I never was able to do because I was always competing. So I wasn't able to go and ride powder and do all those things. So I'm looking forward to making it part of my lifestyle. Like I think now, like my kids, I'm going to get them into snowboarding when I have kids in the long future. All those kind of things. So I think it is starting to progress. Like I've healed my relationship with the sport in a sense where now it is part of my lifestyle. But it's funny because exactly that, this another person commented on that guy's post and said, like, you're always a snowboarder, like you never retire from being a snowboarder. And for me, I think for a long time I really struggled with that, but now I'm like, no, it's like part of who I am. And so I kind of had separated myself from the community a little bit when I retired, but now I'm like, no, like that's a big part of who I am. I'm a snowboarder. I'm still, I still, when I go with my brother and his friends or anything, like I'm still good. Like people are like, oh, like your sister's really good. And he's like, well, she was on the national team. Like, so I can still do things. I can still progress in different areas of the sport that are a little bit less risky.
So how did the trip to Bali change your perspective on your life trajectory after snowboarding competitively?
Yeah, Bali was like a big thing for me because I never traveled on my own. Every travel I had done was with the team. I know like some people, for example, maybe they'll do a gap year, they'll go travel with their friends or whatever. But everything I had done was traveling with a team. And when you're with your team, especially there's people older than you, younger, there's the physios, there's people who work in the Canada Snowboard office, there's the coaches. You're always trying to impress people. One, you're trying to perform well, you're trying to make sure you have a good impression for your sponsors, for the coaches. So you're never truly just being yourself and doing what you want to do. Of course, I'm doing what I want to, which is snowboard and compete, but you're in situations where you have to present yourself in a certain way rather than just like relax. And if you don't want to do anything that day, don't do anything. So when I got to Bali, I was able to do exactly that. Like there was days I just like, oh, I'm just going to go learn yoga, or I'm going to go and take a meditation class, or then I'm going to go to the gym and meet some friends, or I'm going to go surf, or I'm just going to go drive into the jungle and like go hike and see what I find and then come back. I could just kind of do whatever I wanted, and without people knowing who I was or what I did or any like identity piece attached. It was just like me, the human being, just there doing my own thing. So that was really cool to kind of just be separation from that, because I went through a really big identity crisis and mental health challenges during that summer since I kind of stepped away from the sport. So that was a really big piece into like rediscovering who I was outside of snowboarding.
Yeah, a lot of the podcast episodes that I filmed thus far have had really intense underpinnings of anxiety crises. And I think that that is a common denominator between everyone who has left their sport, whether you've been injured and left, or whether you've aged out of competition, or whether, I mean, anything. However, you decide to leave your sport, whether the choice is made for you or you're making it on your own, there's always a period after that where they're like, "What do I do now? Like, this has been my life for so long, and now who am I?" How
Yeah.
did that trip begin to solidify who you are going to be going forward?
Yeah, it made me realize that like I'm not what I do. So like I'm just a big believer now, like you're a human being and not a human doing. And so before I thought I was just defined by what I do. And so not making the Olympics and then quitting snowboarding a year later, I was like, that's what I'm defined by. Like I'm a failure. I gave my life to this and then I didn't make it. And now I have to like restart or figure something else, or what is my future? Everything I envisioned was in this sport. So like, what is my life 5, 10 years down the line going to be now? And so I was just able to be like, wait a second, no, like who I am is more important than the things that I do or the things that I accomplish or the things you put in your Instagram bio or whatever it is. So that was a really big stepping stone in that path to healing. And of course, 1 month didn't fix everything. There's still tons of work to do. There's always going to be work to do on that process, but it was a big Kickstarter for sure.
So, Bali coupled with your introduction to CrossFit, I mean, that created a family like you had with snowboarding, did it not?
Yeah, it was really great. I mean, over the years, I've ended up like changing gyms and like meeting new people and different things. But yeah, it was a really good thing to have, basically to dive into, to kind of have a support system. For a while, it was really hard because all the people at the gym would ask me like, "Why are you stepping away from snowboarding?" Like, because when I first met them, they were all excited that I was this national team athlete training at the gym and all these things. So it was really hard to also separate myself from that, even in that situation. But once I kind of just, people realized I didn't really want to talk about it, then it kind of moved on. And it was like, no, you're just, another one of us just here to train and be better and whatever. So I was able to dive into that. I was able to start competing in that. And then, yeah, and then I was able to go on this trip and kind of discover myself outside of sport in total.
So then, how do you get connected with TEDx and become a speaker? And what was your speaking environment like? I mean, what were you hoping to impart on anyone who listened to your speech?
Yeah. So, yeah, it was pretty much over the last, I guess, year and so, especially the pandemic, I kind of dedicated myself to, making more content, especially videos and different things, and putting myself out there more. And as a result from that, all of a sudden I got contacted by a TEDx event, asking me if I want to be part of it. And of course I said yes. I've listened to TED Talks like when I was going snowboarding, when I was a kid. Like I'm a big fan. My whole family loves listening to TED Talks. I remember seeing my mom on the exercise bike while watching TED Talks. So yeah, just love listening and watching some of the inspiring speakers. So yeah, when I got asked, I was super excited. And then I asked like, what's the theme or the topic? And they're like, no, like we listened to your podcast. We just want like you to talk about like your story. And so that was actually really difficult because without a theme or a specific topic of the event, it was like, how do I take my whole story and make it into one idea? Because TED Talks aren't just about a story. Of course, you want to use storytelling to kind of convey your message. But the thing about TED Talk is it's like viral ideas. So you have to really portray one concise idea or, thought that you're putting out there. And so for me, it was like that failure isn't actually failure in the sense of how we look at it. And it was based on my experience of how I focused so much on results that it drove me to, poor in mental health and all these things that I experienced in snowboarding, to then the point of I didn't make the Olympics. And then I ended up walking away. And then how I've developed my mindset to not look at failure like that anymore in the same sense, and how I don't believe failure is a failure. I don't look at that like, oh, that was when I peaked in life and now I'll never hit that again. It's like, no, that's all just a stepping stone. And I hope I peak on my deathbed. Like it's all going to be build up and build up. So that's kind of the theme of it. It was difficult to you only have like 10 minutes, and trying to concise it down again into one idea. Because I feel like, oh, I could talk about growth mindset, or I could talk about failure, or I could talk about mental health. So I was like, how do I intertwine all those undertones of my story, but into that one idea? So it ended up being called Failure, what I learned from not making the Olympics. Hopefully it resonates with I know there's a lot of athletes now, and we see everyone, the ones who have made it to this Summer Olympics, kind of their stories, but there's countless other athletes who just missed out by a few spots, or who, whatever happened. I know this morning Shikari got kind of disqualified and all these things. So there's a lot of athletes that could resonate with that story, I think. So I hope that athlete or not, really, it just kind of teaches you that these are all lessons. We can all learn from these things, and that whatever this setback is, or this failure, in a sense, it's not a failure if you can take something from it. In fact, it could be one of the greatest moments in your life if you can take something and move forward with it. And so hopefully people resonate with that. But yeah, I literally filmed it up in my house outside on the balcony, because it was all virtual this year with COVID and everything in the pandemic. So definitely threw a wrench in all the plans, because we went into a super huge lockdown right before I was about to film. So I had some ideas about how we can make it, because it was virtual. I didn't want to pretend I was on a stage. I wanted to do scene changes and make it like a YouTube video, like interactive and engaging, because I've never seen that in a TED Talk before. And because you're on stage, you can't really do that. But because there was no rules, like I asked the guy who was running the event, and he's like, he talked to the TEDx people, and he said, no, like there, you can do whatever you want with the virtual. But I was seeing people just talking on Zoom, and I was like, no, I want to do, like, embrace the uniqueness. But then, yeah, we weren't allowed to meet up with filmers, nothing with our lockdown. Yeah, we were just in super lockdown. So it did end up being me kind of like talking in two different angles, basically as if it was like talking on a stage. But hopefully the message is what's the most important part about it.
Yeah, I know when you and I were like starting out on Clubhouse, you guys were in Canada just super uber locked down. And we were in America just doing whatever the heck we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to open up now. Like yesterday, I was finally able to see friends that I hadn't seen for a year,
Good.
outdoors and hiking. But yeah, we're starting to be able to get like our second vaccines and different things. So things are progressing, but we were just a little bit slower here. And like even gyms aren't open in some areas here still. They've been closed for a year, which is still kind of crazy to think about. But yeah, we went back. We kind of started opening up a little bit after kind of the Christmas and everything. And that was when I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I can actually meet up with someone to film and do all these things. And then we went into like the deepest lockdown. Like we had a curfew, we had tons of different things. So it was pretty bad.
Yeah, I heard about that. I heard about the the strict nature with which Canada had locked itself down. And I mean, that was simply not happening in the United States.
Yeah, it's been crazy to see the comparison. I've been thinking about going to the States at the end of the month for this competition that some of my friends are competing in. But I'm very iffy because I'm kind of scared of the States, because here we've been in such lockdown. So I even feel like personally, like I don't even know how to socialize anymore. I'm like, oh, it'd be so weird in a huge crowd of people. That's like a big stepping stone to go from, being used to complete lockdown to a huge crowd. I'm like, maybe I need some like, in between type things for a few months before I get to that comfort level.
Yeah, I mean, everything in the United States is opening up state by state. So different states will have different requirements for mask mandates. And I mean, I'm in a state that does not really enjoy government supervision. So they're like, we're not going to wear masks anywhere. It's fine. Everything's fine. This is not happening in our state. And that was tricky because I didn't abide by that. Like, my family was wearing masks and had been for a year and a half, and
Yeah.
so we were just staying inside, staying away from eating out and going to heavily crowded places, and just over the past, like, month or 2, the cases have dropped and everything has kind of gotten back to normal a little bit, but it's still a rather lackadaisical approach to mandating anything.
Yeah, I've been hearing from a lot of friends in the US that it's almost like they get looked at weird for wearing a mask. But
Yeah.
here masks are still mandatory. Yeah, we have to wear a mask everywhere. Even so, gyms aren't open in the province beside me, which is only 15 minutes away. In my province, they've reopened, but yeah, you have to wear a mask the whole time. So I mostly train at home because it's pretty hard to like do some really heavy breathing stuff with the mask. But like I like to go there and rock climb and just do some different things that I don't have access to at home. But yeah, grocery stores, I don't think you can even go in anywhere here without a mask. I think you'll be turned away. But it was kind of funny yesterday. Yesterday was Canada Day here, and so I went hiking with some friends. We went out to this like pub. The patios are open, some indoor restaurants aren't open, but you can sit outside and everything. And so that was nice. And then we went over to this like bike shop kind of place. And the guy is a new business and they wanted to give us a tour. And he was like, no mask outside, but with distance. So I was like, hey, that's normal. But then he like walked inside, no mask. And we were all like, what? Like, this is not normal. And I was like, I think you just forgot. But it's like you look really weird at people who aren't wearing masks here. But I think in the States it's the opposite now. People are like, why are people still wearing masks? But yeah, here it's yeah, it's mandated.
So how has your podcast allowed you to over I guess an overreach of communication from the lockdown because you're doing a podcast and you're talking to all of these interesting people and you can't talk to them in person. So how has that podcast kind of become a conduit to you socializing and learning more ideas and viewpoints and worldviews?
Yeah, it's been really helpful for me because even before the pandemic, where I live is kind of like a government town area. It's like the nation's capital. So, and just being an entrepreneur and an athlete, what I do and how I think about work is so different than the 9 to 5, get a pension, whatever mentality of government. So I've always kind of felt like I just still am trying to find my people who are athletes and entrepreneurs and, creators online and doing all these cool things. Just because it's easier to, jam out on ideas and relate and do these things, and people who are having deep conversations about mindset, life, mental health, these things. And I felt like that I was missing that from my life. So then actually when the pandemic happened, it was so funny because I feel like I've grown so much socially and conversationally by doing podcasts like this, by hosting my own podcast. I've been able to have these deep conversations and connect with people with like minds from all around the world, where before it was like you're kind of stuck in your own area, but now everyone around the world is like, oh, let's Zoom with someone in Australia, let's Zoom with someone in LA. It's super easy and you can build friendships that way, where it wasn't as accessible before the pandemic because people were meeting in person. So that person in LA might not have time to do a Zoom or whatever it was, but now everyone was kind of brought together with the online world.
Can you give us kind of an elevator pitch of the content that you're producing with your podcast?
Yeah, so it's really just so it's called All In, and it challenges the thought about being all in, where people might think all in is like sacrificing life and just focusing on one thing. It's about actually prioritizing you and going all in on anything you want to be, whether it's a better mom, whether it's a better athlete, better in your mental health, better in your daily wellness practices and your recovery. And so I like to bring on just individuals who do really cool things, especially in sport, because that's my world, that's my language, that's how I view the world. But the podcast is for athletes and non-athletes because I think the lessons from sport are very relatable to everyday life, and especially the metaphors in sport. When you're a non-athlete and you can visualize someone's sport experience, it's such the extremes that then you can visualize it in any aspect, business, family, whatever it is. And then a big focus definitely on the mindset piece and things like mental toughness, mental health, those kind of things. Mostly because during the pandemic, when I really kind of got this podcast going, was I just saw a lot of negativity going on online, and I wanted to like focus back onto positivity, resilience, and conversations that could uplift people and give them practical tools on how to go all in still on their dreams and their goals in sport or not sport, still while the pandemic was ongoing and then beyond that.
Yeah, I think that my podcast is so focused on the mental game that it allows people to kind of work through their journey in a mental capacity. Like, for example, your story is obviously a physical story, but it is so much more a mental struggle and journey. And I think that every step of the way, you've been kind of surrounded by sports psychology, whether or not you were working with a sports psychologist at the time. And I think that that's what I take away from a lot of the interviews that I do, because the mental game is crucial to the physical process. And even once you've left your sport, those lessons still apply.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think all those things you learn from sport definitely you carry over. And even people who aren't athletes, they take away things from the stories because, yeah, with sports being so physical, it kind of like puts a visual image in people's heads of this mental challenge that people are overcoming. And so then you're able to apply it to everything else.
Yeah. So let's also talk about your marketing agency and how social media plays a role in brand management, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, I think it's huge, especially, I mean, on the date of this recording, yesterday, NIL rules changed, right? So that changes the game for a lot of college athletes who weren't able to monetize. For me, I never even thought about that. It's funny because I look back and I'm like, oh, I never even worried about anything with that. And at one point, I was trying to look and see if any colleges in the US actually had any snowboard programs, which is funny because I probably wouldn't have been eligible if they did because I already was making money off sponsors and stuff. I never even growing up had to think about that because of the sport that I was in. So for me, I grew up in a sport where, you know, branding yourself is pretty much what got you into events, what got you funding, everything, especially before snowboarding got into the Olympics. There was no national team. It was, you were really reliant just on sponsorships. And if you look at the action sport industry, right, like everyone has like an energy drink sponsor, like it runs off that. So that was a huge part of me figuring out, especially coming from a place where my family couldn't afford to send me all around the world snowboarding. I had to really kind of pay for most of the things myself, and I didn't have all the resources. So I had to figure out how can I get the resources and funding from sponsorships. I knew just like how training in the gym and sports psychology would kind of be my unique advantages since I didn't have as much time on snow as my competitors or my teammates. Similarly, I said, okay, I need to, the business side of things also needs to be my competitive advantage. And I mean, part of it was natural because I had all those businesses. I was interested in marketing and business. So I was like my real life case study because I always knew I'd have businesses in the future. So I was like, even all the things I'm learning by myself is better than any marketing class I took at school. So that was really helpful. And then social media came up on the scene, so I was able to start using that and leverage that to get sponsorships as well as to build my brand and build my audience and opportunities and impact and things like that, and learn to create content. Also, snowboarding is like a natural content creator sport. Like you're always filming and taking pictures and doing things, because before the Olympics, the main part of snowboarding was actually filming and making movies. So it's always been a big part of it. So I think it kind of came naturally in a sense. And then now with my agency, trying to help other athletes do that because it's even more important than it was when I was doing it. And there still aren't that many people helping with the education side of how can athletes learn to do this for themselves. There's agencies in there trying to connect them with brand deals, especially now there's a million of them popping up trying to take advantage of NIL and get a percentage of that cut or whatever it is. But I'm like, how about helping the athletes actually figure out how to build their brand? Because an agency might come in and tell them, hey, like I can hook you up with this $200 sponsorship deal or whatever it is, $2,000. But how can the athlete move up and get more? They need to know how they can build more content, how they can grow their audience, all these things that nobody is really stepping in to teach them. So I think it's a really important part. I think it also empowers the athlete to take control of their name, image, and likeness now that they have the control over it, especially for college athletes. And also to impact the next generation, especially when you look at female athletes, when we're getting only 4% of media coverage compared to male athletes getting most of it. Social media and going direct to fans is one of the best ways that female athletes can make a big impact to the next generation and in their sports right now.
So what would you say to current and former athletes who are trying to get better at building their brand? I mean, do they have to post on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and YouTube and TikTok? I mean, is there a line that they cross where it's like, okay, this is too much?
Yeah, I always say, like, if it's impacting your mental health, take a step back and make a better game plan and only commit to what you can be consistent with. Because I'm a big believer, like, consistency is the most important. So if you can only post once a week, don't just burn yourself out like trying to, oh, I'm going to post every day. And then a week later, you're burnt out and you don't post for a month. It's better to just post that one time a week. And if you get a bunch of content one week, save it and save it for those days that you don't have it, or you're not in the mood to go film something new or whatever it is. Even I do that. Like when I go out to work out, often I'll take my camera and I'll film tons of clips. And then when a new TikTok trend comes, I have all these clips in the bank that I can use. And that saves me a lot of time as well as a lot of energy for days that I'm like, I don't feel like going out and filming this new thing from scratch. I'm like, wait a second, I have like 1,000 videos I can go back through and figure out how to use it. So yeah, I definitely think there is definitely a line that can be crossed. I think as you get better at social media, you can start maybe, oh, if I can just take this post and reformat it and post it over here, then I can also be on this platform. But if you just try off the get-go to be like, I'm going to be everywhere and I'm going to be there every day, it's going to get very overwhelming very quickly.
So how many platforms are you posting on, and how does the content that you're posting on each one vary in the way that it's being presented?
Yeah, so TikTok is a big one that I'm on. Probably I post the most on there because I try to post almost daily. And then Instagram is probably the second. I post definitely multiple times a week, and I'm pretty active on my stories. But that's kind of like the main platform these days for most people. My Facebook, not super active, is mostly friends and family, but I try to post up like some podcasts or some major updates like my TED Talk or something like that, because I know those always like my friends and family, and then my parents' friends, they like share all those things. So try to get those out there. And then LinkedIn and Twitter. Twitter was actually that first platform that I used to connect to brands when I first started on social media. I think it was like one of the first social media platforms I ever had. But now I don't really use it quite as often. But yeah, LinkedIn, I'm very active on. TikTok, very active. Instagram, very active. And sometimes my posts will differ. Sometimes they kind of cross over. For example, Instagram now has Reels. So I've had a lot of success with that because I'm able to take some of the TikToks that I've created and then literally download them and put them up onto Reels as well. Which has been awesome and saved me a ton of time because I'm already creating this content that's really important to me out on TikTok, and I can reuse it rather than before. Actually, what I would do before there was Reels was maybe I would type up in the caption. So say I posted something about motivation on my TikTok and it was a video, I might use like kind of the wording that I use and have a picture on Instagram and use that caption. And then same thing on LinkedIn, I can just do the words, no picture, and kind of make it as different paragraph blocks and do the same thing. And then on Twitter, I can make it a thread where I say like maybe 5 lessons I learned from the gym into life. That would be a good example. I think I did something like that similar. And then I could post it up on my Twitter. And then even I could screenshot that and then put it back on my Instagram and do lots of different things. So I try to do that because if I have one idea that I'm like, this is an important message I want to put out there, then I want to try to bring it over to different points. But at the same time, there's some things like I always post my podcast on LinkedIn. Not always do I post it on my personal Instagram. I always obviously post it on my podcast Instagram. Don't really post it on my TikTok. I find it doesn't do as well there. And so there's different platforms that I find definitely favor different things for sure.
So how can an athlete who's looking for sponsorships capitalize on their social media presence to bring those people and those entities and businesses in to get noticed?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing is like you can use LinkedIn to even find who the decision makers at brands are. So that's like a big hack that I try to tell athletes because nobody tells them that. And they think, oh, I'll just DM brands. And I'm like, usually when you're DMing, they might just be one, they might not read it because they might get a lot of DMs now. It used to not be the case. Like I used to on Twitter, when Twitter first came about, I would message brands and I'd be the owner of their company often that would like message me back because it was before there were social media managers. But now there's social media managers, and then below there's social media coordinators. Like there's a whole social media department. So chances are you're reaching somebody who has no influence over picking their team, their athlete team or anything. Especially if you like were to DM Nike, that's probably not going to do anything. You want to be in contact with the right people, and often on LinkedIn is a way to do that. Because you can find those decision makers, the athlete manager, the brand manager, the marketing manager right there. But then, when you just want to open up the relationship, using your stories and posting brands that you use. If I'm drinking a protein shake here and I want to get sponsored by the company, what if I just prove to them I'm a customer first and like post about it? And then I can show them, I can message them on LinkedIn or email and show them, hey, when I posted this, like 50 people click to go over to your brand. So there's a lot of interest. Or sending them screenshots and saying, whenever I post about my workouts, people always ask what workout I'm doing. So then you can bring that to the company of workouts that you do or whatever it is. So there's a lot of different ways you can use social media just to reach out to those brands, as well as prove to them that you could be of value.
And how is that going to change with NIL, where you have brands coming the other way and finding these athletes?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think the brands are going to go to the top athletes, right? They're not maybe going to search everyone. So I think like what I really want to do is empower those other athletes. It's like you could be D3, it doesn't matter, but you can figure out a way to still build your brand out on social media. I know there was a story of a kicker who was a D3 kicker, and then he got so big on YouTube that he wanted to make money off it. He just quit being a football player. Now he makes millions of dollars on YouTube. So there's always a way, no matter what level of athlete you are, to figure out what brands could align with you. There's always a story, whether it's from your hometown, a car dealership from your hometown or something, or it could be, maybe you're bigger than that, but you have this bigger story about mental health and you get Headspace or Calm as a sponsor or something, right? Like there's a lot of different things. But I think for the athletes who are getting these messages and they're getting brands coming in, you got to start figuring out then, like, what's your worth, what's your value, and what's your rate? And also, how willing are you to sell? I know today I was seeing so many athletes who were just posting in their stories saying, hey, NIL now means I can make money. So if you're a brand, just reach out to me. And I'm like, that is the worst way to go about it. Because one, you're posting in your story, telling your followers, who are the people you're going to be selling to, basically, because you're going to have a sponsor, that then you're trying to get them to go buy that sponsor's products, that you're willing to just like take any deal to make money. So then how is your audience trusting you about your recommendations, for one thing? Two, you're just like saying, hey, I just want to like make some money, which isn't like the best way to go about it. So my suggestion is figure out what you're worth, but also be willing to say no to things. I get messages from brands every single day who want me to do a TikTok or something different. And I say no to 90% because often they might not align perfectly. And if they do, for example, I had a cider company and I'm a big fan of their ciders, but I say, that's not usually something I post on my social media. If I posted anything, it might be a non-alcoholic beer, because I drink a lot of non-alcoholic beers. It's pretty rare that I drink an alcohol. If I were, I would drink their cider, but I'm like, I don't think my audience would resonate with that as much as if I had another beverage brand. And although they wouldn't be competing, I want my audience to trust my recommendations and not see that I'm just, a McDonald's partnership here or this partnership here is not going to let my audience trust me. And then when the right sponsor comes around, I might not be able to deliver them the actual result that they need to see. So I think it's really important for athletes to kind of know their brand values, compare them to these offers that they're getting, know their rates, but also be willing to wait for the right brand partnership at the right rate, and see, because you can't sell to 20 different sponsors at once. That's just going to dilute your audience. They'll never trust you again. So make sure that you know that you're always wanting to still be building that audience, not just selling out all their trust at once, and finding those right brand partnership fits.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that NIL has become so prevalent in the age of influencers. So I just wanted to know your opinion on what defines an influencer, and how, as a brand, do you look at a batch of contestants and say, this one is who I want to partner with?
Yeah, so I actually, in my business, I've helped a lot of brands sponsor athletes and do influencer marketing. So I've kind of been on both sides, as well as even personally, I have like partnerships that I've been a part of as a creator and as an athlete. So yeah, I think the term influencer, I think, can be applied to anybody. Like, it's so funny because someone will say, I have 200 followers, I have less than 1,000 followers, I'm not an influencer. People think it's like a certain metric. I'm like, where in the world before social media did 1,000 people follow you? Like, that's crazy. That's filling up a huge stadium. So I was like, that actually is influence. We all carry influence. We all, even if we're not on social media, we carry influence over our family, over our friends, like people who are around us. So I think like everyone is an influencer in a sense. Some people, that's their job. Like they create content, they like they spend a lot of time purposely growing their influence and the amount of people that they're influencing. And then they make money, selling things and influencing those people. So I think we're all influencers. There's some people that just make a living off of it. And obviously athletes kind of fall in that category somewhat. I know athletes don't want to be called influencers often. And I feel the same way. People are like, oh, you're an influencer. I'm like, I'm an athlete. But I think if we look at the respect that we all have influence and we all are influencers and we can all look at it in that perspective. But when a brand they look for those brand value fits usually. And that's why when a brand reaches out and it just copy paste, I'm like, you didn't try to see if I'm the right fit for you. I have brands, sometimes they like message me for things that like I would never use. And I'm like, well, clearly you're just messaging me because you see I have this many followers, but I'm not going to be the person who says, oh yeah, sure, just because I want to make a few dollars, because I'm going to say I'm not going to be able to deliver you results because it's not the right fit. My audience won't trust me anymore. You won't be happy. I won't be happy. The audience won't be happy. So try to turn those things down. But I think the brands who are doing it right, they're looking and they say they see a few different athletes. Perhaps they're looking for certain sizes. So they're like, okay, we want an athlete within a certain size range based on their budget. Usually they'll be like, okay, we can only pay the athlete $500. So the athlete needs to be between this follower range or whatever. Or maybe they have $10,000. So like, okay, we're looking for 5 athletes at that level, or they're looking for one person at a very higher level. So they may do things based on their budget, but then they'll look at brand value fit and they'll see, okay, like our product is, let's say their product is like a tool to make you breathe better or something. They might look for athletes who post frequently about training but meticulous in their training, like someone who like just never post about training might not be the best fit, but an athlete posted behind the scenes of their training as well as how they're specifically trying to work on their conditioning, that could be the perfect fit because this athlete has already posted that they're trying to work on this specific thing and then this tool is already helping with that. So I think mostly they're trying to look for that right fit, that it fits in the athlete story, because the best partnerships are the ones that feel organic and that they are organic. For example, I just recently signed a deal with a workout company, but it is organic because I am going to be doing all their training and following that track of programming. I believe in like the workouts that they're doing and all these things, but I've had tons of workout apps to try to get me to, oh, can you just make one post and we'll pay you this or this? And I'm like, I don't do that type of workout. I'm a CrossFit competitor. So my programming has to be that specific. So yeah, you got to find things that fit and are like, would be natural to post about in a sense.
Yeah. It's funny, like when I check my Instagram DMs and there are like random fashion accounts that are like, be an ambassador. We
Yeah,
love
those are the bad ones. They're like
we love
everywhere.
what you've
Yeah,
been posting. And I'm like, first of all, my account is locked down, so you don't even know what my posts are.
I know. I
Like this
think
is
they mass
terrible.
send
This
things.
is terrible outreach.
Yeah, I get companies that are like, I was like, have I ever, they're like dresses. And I'm like, yeah, like sometimes I'll wear a dress, but have you ever seen one post on my social media where I'm wearing a dress? No. So I'm like, no. Or then like I get a lot of like apparel companies and I've had a clothing sponsor for 4 years. So like a fitness clothing. So then I'm like, well, you probably haven't, if you say you've been following me for a while and following my posts closely, you'll notice I'm always wearing one brand every single time. Whether I'm like, because I usually don't push it hard like other promotions, I just literally use their products all the time because it's what I wear. Yeah. So it's funny because I'm like, you probably didn't pay attention and see that. So if you're telling me that you've been following my post for a year, I'm like, I don't think so. Because you would notice that I obviously have like a sponsor.
So is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I have concluded the questions that I was planning on asking. Is there anything else that you think that I missed about your journey or that you would like to talk further about?
I know, I think we covered a lot. Yeah, no, I think it's good.
Okay, great. And then this episode will go out next week. So can I just get a either a headshot or like a picture of you in action to use on social media?
Yeah, you want probably something with snowboarding?
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything. I mean, I've had headshots, I've had action shots. It's just going to go on like an Instagram picture.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I can just send it over
Okay,
Instagram. Cool.
awesome. And then I'll message you once it's out and I'll tag you it on Instagram and Twitter and then we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Sounds good. We'll have a great I guess you guys have a holiday weekend.
Do we?
Is
Oh,
it
the
the
fourth.
fourth this weekend?
Fourth is
Yeah,
tomorrow.
yeah.
Yeah, I was like, Oh yeah, yeah, we go hard on the 4th of July.
Yeah, I mean, we had Canada Day yesterday. We don't really go as hard as the US does for your guys like before, because that's like our version of the fourth.
Right.
But yesterday was kind of like a no celebration day because of all the indigenous bodies that were
Right.
found. Yeah. So it was actually cool to see because they were encouraging people to wear orange. Sadly, the only orange thing I have is a WNBA hoodie, which it was way too hot to wear yesterday. But there was actually, I saw way more people wearing orange than wearing anything with Canada yesterday, which was like actually pretty cool to see because I feel like that would never happen in the States. And people would not
We
give up their 4th of July celebrations.
we are so patriotic that sometimes it embarrasses me.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, it's pretty crazy that like most people just gave up their whole celebration yesterday. I mean, like I got together with friends to hike because they had the day off work, but otherwise, yeah, there was no celebrations of Canada Day. I heard some fireworks late at night, which then I woke up in the morning to our whole community group with like 4 dogs had run away because of the fireworks. Because dogs get really scared of fireworks, and around here, people's dogs are outside pretty often. So that I was like, oh gosh, because they were telling people not to do fireworks this year and stuff, and all the fireworks across all cities got canceled to honor like the day of just respecting and not celebrating Canada
Right.
Day in a sense. Yeah, I feel again that would never happen in the States.
No, yeah. I mean, like, I've been kind of watching what's happening with the indigenous children from, I don't know, like a lot of different, just American social media have been following that, and it's really terrible, like
Yeah, we learned
horrific.
to, yeah, it's funny because I learned about it in school, like as a kid. So like a lot of people are saying they never learned about it. And I was like, why? But then I realized I went to public school and a lot of people here went to Catholic school. So like that's why they didn't get taught because it was the Catholic churches that took those kids and tried to like whitewash them and away from their culture. So I was like realizing that my boyfriend went to Catholic school and I was like, why didn't you learn that? And it's funny because a lot of people here, even if they're not religious, go to Catholic school because often in towns they're just a Catholic school. Like half the kids I played hockey with went to Catholic school, but none of them were really religious. So it was interesting to see that a lot of people actually didn't learn about it versus myself going to public school. We were taught about it, but still not to we should have been taught much more about it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've been following the US's understanding of what's been happening, and it's scary. It's
Yeah,
scary that no one, I mean, like, people knew that this was happening, and no one talked about it.
yeah. It is pretty crazy, and I think, oh, I mean, I think that happened in pretty much every country where there's settlers, right? Like they came and they said, "Oh, we discovered this," but there was all the indigenous people already there. Like, no, you didn't. And then they just, yeah, I mean, here what they did, I think they took these kids away from their families, but I don't. It wasn't always forcefully. Like it was also like they would promise things. Like they would say, if your kid is going to survive in this world that we have created now, like they have to come with us. We're going to teach them. We're going to feed them. We're going to like basically they took away all the First Nations food, all these things, and then they said, oh, now you have to send our kids with us if they want to be fed and taught and all these things. But then they try to, if the First Nations people, the kids spoke their language, they would beat them, and yeah, it's just horrible.
Well, I'll be following everything that's happening up there. I mean, I hope that this is the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they search all the locations, I'm sure there'll be much more bodies found. But yeah, it's crazy for sure.
Well, this interview took a turn.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it'll go out next Wednesday. So I may just blow up your notifications, just be prepared for it.
All good. Awesome.
And then I'm excited to put your episode together. And
Sweet. Yeah, I'll send over a photo
okay,
like as soon as it's over because I'll remember.
sounds good. And I'll talk to you soon.
Cool. Yeah,
Have
have
a
a
good
good
rest of
weekend.
your day.
Bye.
Bye.